doesn't do lunch, but Nigel Farage...
Miliband says that lunch is for wimps. Well, I tell you what, I think that lunch is pretty cool.
Farage certainly does. Get ready, Britain, here we go. The Saudis can warm up for the World Cup by having a kickabout with some severed heads. Next.
Good evening, I'm Will Hollis with your top story at 9 o'clock. The government will not change the terrorist status of the rebels who toppled the Syrian regime, according to the Defence Secretary. Speaking after an emergency Cobra meeting, John Healey said the government is laser-focused on stopping a resurgence of terror groups like ISIS in the Middle East, but he says now is not the time to consider removing Hayat Tahrir al-Sham from the proscribed terror list.
Conscription is not a matter for now. It doesn't stop us talking to all the parties, and our interest in HTS is that they live up to their promises to protect the rights of all individuals and all groups, to respect international law, and to prevent Syria becoming a base for fresh terrorist threats.
A body has been found in the search for former England rugby player Tom Voice, who went missing 5 days ago. It's feared the 43-year-old was swept away while trying to cross a flooded river on Saturday night during Storm Dara. It's believed Mr Voice had entered the River Ann near Anwick after attempting to cross Aberwick Ford in his car. Northumbria Police's Marine Unit discovered a body earlier today, describing the development as extremely sad. In other news, the government demands immediate mandatory housing targets from councils as part of plans to build 1.5 million houses by the next general election. Sir Keir Starmer is vowing to override blockers and put builders first as he prepares to unveil sweeping changes to the planning process. It could mean more developments on the Greenbelt, though the government has pledged to prioritise brownfield sites. A man who tried to set fire to a hotel housing asylum seekers has been jailed for 9 years, the joint longest prison sentence in connection with the UK's summer of riots. Levi Fishlock smashed windows and stoked a flaming bin at the Holiday Inn Express in Rotherham during a spate of disorder on the 4th of August. The 31-year-old initially denied violent disorder and arson with intent to endanger life, but later pleaded guilty to the charges. Fishlock's sentence includes a 5-year licence period after he's released from jail. And your last story for now, comedian Duncan Norvelle has died, aged 66. Hailed as one of the last legends of true variety comedy, the entertainer, known for his catchphrase "Chase Me," died in hospital surrounded by his loved ones. Those are your top stories for now, but now it's back to Patrick.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. The attempt to sportswash radical Sharia regimes continues. Saudi Arabia will be the latest Middle Eastern hellhole to host the World Cup.
It is a great pleasure that I can confirm that the host of the FIFA World Cup 2034 will be Saudi Arabia.
So, FIFA has faced allegations of corruption in the past. Qatar and Russia got the World Cups recently, didn't they? But at least they had to go through a bidding process. This time, FIFA managed to find a way of seemingly removing that obstacle. The Saudis won it unopposed, and I, for one, just perplexed as how that could have happened. But the head of FIFA, this Fruit Loop called Gianni Infantino, who gave this weird conference before the Qatar tournament.
Today I feel Arab.
Today I feel African. Today I feel gay. Today I feel disabled.
Right then. Anyway, he has said that he hopes Saudi Arabia will address human rights concerns. Well, let's have a little look at some of those concerns. Saudi Arabia is the only recognised country in the world to still use decapitation as a method of execution. Presumably, the Saudi football team can warm up for their matches by having a kickabout with some recently severed heads. It has executed more than 100 foreigners since 2024. That's nearly triple the previous 2 years. Apparently, their total executions so far this year are 274, the highest figure in more than 30 years. They are accused of torturing people into giving confessions. It's only as recently as 2019 that women were allowed to travel abroad, register for divorce or marriage and apply for official documents without the permission of a male guardian. Saudi Arabian men apparently receive a text message on their mobile phones whenever a woman under their custody leaves the country, even if she is travelling with her guardian. In 2008, a man reportedly married off his 8-year-old daughter to a 47-year-old bloke in order to pay off his debts. Women and children often live in forced marriages. Gay people are imprisoned and sentenced to hundreds of lashes. A man caught using Twitter to arrange dates with other men was reportedly sentenced to 450 lashes. It's interesting, though, isn't it? Because recently, England footballer Mark Gay was reprimanded for writing "I love Jesus" on an LGBT armband that the Premier League wanted him to wear. So presumably he could be executed twice for that in Saudi Arabia, blasphemy and encouraging homosexuality. Saudi Arabia has the highest prevalence of modern slavery of all countries in the Arab states region, which is quite the achievement, actually. Migrant workers comprise the majority of the workforce. And who do we think might be building these brand spanking new football stadiums? Well, in terms of press freedom, well, hey, I mean, look, the Saudis murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi in an embassy in Turkey, didn't they? They actually carved him up with a bone saw. So there he is, walking in to meet his fate. I haven't seen Gary Lineker pipe up much about the Saudi World Cup yet. It's funny that, because he's very quick to point out supposed human rights abuses involving Israel and for people illegally crossing the English Channel. At least he'll be retired by then. Oh, and just for good measure, Saudi Arabia is said to be the world's largest exporter of Salafist jihadism, which forms the ideological basis of groups like Al-Qaeda, the Taliban and ISIS. So with that in mind, I think we can all agree that the correct way to respond to those human rights abuses is to give the Saudis a World Cup so they can lie to the world about how lovely and safe they are. After all, hey, it worked for Qatar. Everyone forgot that they actually housed Hamas until October the 7th kicked off. To all those idiots cheering on the Saudi World Cup, well done, because you're giving legitimacy to a radical Sharia ideology that would probably not blink twice if it had the chance to wipe you off the face of the earth. Let's get towards my panel this evening. We've got political consultant Suzanne Evans. We also have political commentator Charlie Downs, the former Labour Party advisor Matthew Larser. Suzanne, it does seem a little bit odd that Saudi Arabia gets the World Cup. Where are the likes of Gary Lineker on this?
Gary Lineker's never to be seen when there's something to really talk about that's of actual, genuine human rights importance, is there? It's not a surprise, Patrick, that FIFA's given the World Cup to Saudi Arabia. As you said in your monologue just now, Russia in 2018, Qatar in 2022. The fact is, FIFA has no moral compass whatsoever. It's completely bereft of any ethics on this kind of thing at all. And why? Well, I'm sure the fact that Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company, gives FIFA £100 million a year in sponsorship has absolutely nothing to do with it.
Nothing at all. And we couldn't possibly draw a link with that.
Absolutely not.
And we wouldn't want to be seen to be doing so. It's vitally important to say that. Charlie, your views on whether or not there is a wider point here, which is that this provides legitimacy to regimes like this that are accused of sponsoring terrorism and definitely do chop people's heads off.
Well, it's always interesting, isn't it, when a non-Western authoritarian regime kind of meets the liberal press in our kind of sphere, because we are, very, I think, closed off to this part of the world for the most part, because, we use these phrases like human rights abuses and this sort of thing, and I wouldn't want to live in Saudi Arabia personally. I don't think it seems like a very nice country to live in. But with that being said, I mean, the term human rights has completely lost all meaning because it's under the brand of human rights that, you know, illegal migrants are allowed to stay in this country and get up to, you know, we know not what. And so, you know, this framing of this being about human rights, I kind of struggle with because there are reasons to criticise regimes like Saudi Arabia. But if we do it using the framing of our own regimes, which are in their own way really bad, you know, and they you know, create conditions that make people's lives worse in a very different and far less kind of immediately apparent way to those more kind of blunt instrument regimes in the East. I don't know. It just doesn't feel like the right kind of framing. I think there's a conversation to be had about, you know, the way that we apply Western standards to these places. And that's not to say that I'm, you know, defending the practices that go on there in any way, but I think we need to look at ourselves.
The hypocrisy of it. I mean, I think Keir Starmer quite recently met the latest Saudi king, didn't he, and said to him, oh, maybe we could go to a football match together. I mean, how does that... Keir Starmer's history as a human rights lawyer, how does that marry up with going and pressing the flesh with a Saudi despot?
Well, I mean, just on the wider point, let me start by saying I've never been prouder to have zero interest in football than I do tonight. I mean, it is an absolute disgrace. And to be fair, quite a lot of liberal opinion. You know, the Guardian's on strike, but they managed to get the criticism of it out before they went on the picket line. In terms of the Prime Minister went to Saudi Arabia last week because Saudi Arabia is a key defence partner for Britain, and every Prime Minister for the last half century or more has done that. Saudi Arabia is the biggest overseas market for defence equipment for Britain. There are thousands of jobs in places like Lancashire that rely on things like the jet project. I've been around the factory with Ed Miliband, of all people, where Saudi, after the UK, is the largest customer. Having said that, I don't think we need to be taking a sport which is not played much in Saudi Arabia due to the heat, where there is no tradition of... It's just ridiculous. I mean, even if you take away the legitimate criticisms there are of the regime, it's just daft to be taking a sport to somewhere, you know, where it isn't an actual thing.
I mean, they've done their best in recent years, obviously, to massively promote football in Saudi Arabia, and you can see why now, and it's been entirely successful to them getting Cristiano Ronaldo over there and a whole host of other players to go and play in that Saudi Pro League. What I will say, though, is, you know, the likes of that FIFA boss coming out and saying, oh, we hope that, you know, the human rights will be respected. I can guarantee what will happen probably in Saudi Arabia, right, which is that it'll be a fantastically well-organised World Cup. The stadiums will all be modern, it'll all be nice, and we'll all leave saying, gosh, wasn't it a lovely time? And if England win, then we'll forget about the whole thing.
Big if.
But then we leave, right, and the beheadings continue.
Of course they do. And I think anyone who goes, frankly, as a spectator to watch this is just buying into the whole thing. However much you love football, I'm sorry, you should not go. End of story. You know, the human rights thing, everyone, they'll try and whitewash it. They absolutely will. They already have. They've hired a Saudi PR firm to say there's no human rights abuses already, so that started too. And you mentioned that lovely stadium. Yeah, well, we had that in Qatar and Doha as well, didn't we, in 2022? Up to 500 workers were killed in the rush to build that stadium because they don't care. As you said in your monologue, they've got slavery. They're not interested in that. So I suspect we'll see the same thing happening again now too, because Saudi Arabia, I understand, has got even more ambitious a building project for its stadia for the World Cup.
And just, Charlie, when it comes to giving legitimacy to regimes that have been accused of and directly linked to sponsoring groups like Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and ISIS, I take your point about the fact that, you know, human rights laws are pretty fast and loose at the moment, and it seems like, you know, you could probably do 20 years if you decided to swat a gnat in this country. However, there is a difference between that and allowing a country that funds groups of people who want to kill us, both in their respective countries and right here in the UK, you know, giving them a perceived aura of legitimacy. Yeah,
I agree that is probably not wise for us to do. But I do want to play devil's advocate here, because I think there is a more serious conversation to be had, which is, you know, Saudi Arabia is set to host the World Cup in 2034. If there's one thing that we can be certain of, it is that Saudi Arabia will still recognisably exist as Saudi Arabia in 2034. Britain, I don't know whether you can say that. I don't know whether, because of the migration situation, because of the birth rate situation in Britain, I don't know whether this country will look the same in 2034.
I mean, geographically, it will. You're talking about kind of cultural and demographic.
Culturally and demographically, and this is the thing. As much as we might...
You think you'd look more like Saudi?
Quite possibly, yeah.
Well,
because as much as we don't like regimes like this in the liberal West, and probably rightfully so, what you can't say is they're not securing the future of their civilization. And I think that as much as there is barbarism that takes place, we also need to look at our own societies and wonder whether we've gone way too far in the other direction.
Matthew, you're screwing your face up.
Well, I mean, Saudi is basically entirely based on migration, as we just seen there. I mean, the stadiums will be built by imported workers with zero rights. One other thing that's pretty bad is there's not just sports washing, there's also culture washing. This week there was another deal signed in France with the Pompidou Centre. It's got a big cheque from Saudi Arabia, and guess what? It's going to co-curate a museum in Saudi Arabia. And I just think it's beholden on people to stand up. The only one football association in the whole world is standing up. The Norwegians have expressed, are the only people who've expressed any disquiet on this. But the whole thing about Saudi Arabia is, if we want to be less dependent, if we want to give the Gulf states less power, we need to be energy independent. So that means electric cars and not petrol ones.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because we're going to be having a discussion about the Ed Miliband issues very, very shortly. But thank you very much for a lively start to the show. Well, it is time now for our biggest and greatest Great British giveaway. This year, it's your chance to win 50 grand in tax-free cash, and here's how you can make that money. Still to come, Conservative MP Joy Morrissey has written to Ed Miliband, asking him to refer himself to the Independent Advisor on Ministerial Standards over his evasion about alleged links between a £4 million donation to the Labour Party and £99,000 to himself, and his appointment of a climate envoy. She's going to join me live in the studio very soon. But up next, it's the head-to-head. Labour is continuing their war on rural England, as Angela Rayner is set to allow construction on an area of green belt that's larger than Surrey. So, is the government prioritising their own agenda at the expense of preserving great British nature? Stay tuned.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
So maybe people are opting for the more traditional ways of meeting people.
Organically.
Meeting organically.
It's the only way to actually... Well, I know some people have
it's worked very well for some people. I mean, I personally think that doing things more organically is probably going to be better, or is more to my taste. But it has worked well for lots of people.
So I absolutely agree. There's a very interesting young woman, she's about 22, who writes on this and has a podcast called Freya India. And she talks about this dating industry, and she said all she ever wanted to do as a teenager was go down the pub and meet a man and fall in love. And the dating apps just don't do that. And she said they've become so, it's just literally people looking for sex. We need to get back to traditional ways of meeting face-to-face, but we also need to stop toxifying it. A man flirting with a woman is not toxic. Men and women have done this for years. Obviously, we need to know about boundaries, but we also need to allow men and women to do what comes naturally.
I think it's also about spontaneity in society. It's much harder to, just randomly go out in an evening in London and not know what you're doing and have a good time than it was, I think, 15 years ago or so.
Yeah,
and if you don't have spontaneity in your life in general terms, then that spontaneous meeting with someone is less likely to happen.
I think it's also where you are, because I was just thinking, as you said, that London, going out to try and meet someone in London is one thing. If you live in a small town and you go down your local pub, there's you're more likely to meet someone that you get to know over a period of time. And
but this is also why we need to support our pubs and our hospitality areas, because they are important social integrators. They really are.
Yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys tonight. Coming up, Conservative MP Joy Morrissey has written to Ed Miliband to refer himself to the Independent Advisor on Ministerial Standards. I mean, Ed Miliband might be in a bit of trouble here, so stay tuned to find out. But first, is building more homes more important than nature? It's time now for the head-to-head. Well, it does appear that Angela Rayner is coming for the countryside. Labour are continuing their war on rural England as the Housing Secretary is set to allow construction on an area of green belt larger than Surrey, scrambling to meet their target of 1.5 million homes by the next election. The government are also set to redefine the grey belt to build on England's green countryside instead of focusing on urban areas, which many say need the investment more. For example, in London, where housing targets have now been reduced by 20%. So Shadow Housing Minister Kevin Hollinrake also raised concerns about who will actually take up these new homes in the Commons today.
Restrictions on the visa requirements, such as the salary threshold and the scrapping of the Rwanda deterrent, the majority of the homes they deliver will be required for people coming into this country rather than from British citizens.
Well, it's a point that many people have been making for a little while, actually. He argues that the government are now prioritising their own agenda at the expense of preserving British nature. So, what is more important, building homes or nature? I'm joined now by the Director of Research at the Adam Smith Institute, Maxwell Marlowe, and the leader of the Climate Party, Ed Gemmell. Chaps, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Ed, I'll start with you. What's more important then, building these houses or, bats and newts?
It's not just bats and newts. Look, we've got to preserve our green belt. It's there for a reason. It's there to stop urban sprawl. It's there to make sure that we have nature for everybody to enjoy. And let's look at it. It's 6,000 square miles in England. It's nearly 2/3, anyway, farmland, and the rest of it is recreational open spaces that we need, with a small amount that's already developed land, maybe 6 to 10%. If we're only talking about the 6 to 10%, I don't suppose you'd see very many people up in arms about it. But if it's going to be trashing all of those wonderful spaces that we all enjoy, no one's going to be for it, particularly in my own area. Buckinghamshire, Hazelmere, everyone's up in arms about it. No one wants to see more greenbelt trashed and lose our countryside.
All right, Maxwell, I'll bring you in now. There are obvious cases for doing this, and I'm assuming you're about to set them out.
I am. I think it's baffling. 6,000 square metres. I mean, the greenbelt makes up 13% of all of the land in England. The areas of outstanding natural beauty make up 15%. So for 38% of England, you're not allowed to build, right? So whatever Ed's talking about here is total nonsense.
6,000 square miles is what I said.
Well, OK, so yes, 13%. So all of the built area in the UK is 2.3%, and yet we're supposed to believe that apparently building more, which is what we need, we have a 4.8 million units deficit in the UK for housing. Apparently that's trashing nature. This is ludicrous. A third of that greenbelt, by the way, is monocultural intensive agriculture, just really not very biodiverse at all. So if we want to solve the housing crisis, which is making the UK very, very poor, we're apparently just supposed to, respect and obey, as Patrick, you said earlier, these bats and newts. This is madness. We need to be building at an insanely high rate to fix the problems we're facing.
Well, one thing, though, Ed, that I think a lot of people will be very, very concerned about is their ability to oppose this legislation. And it is also what exactly is going to be built on this land and who is going to live in it.
Yeah, I mean, the opposition to it, I mean, I think apart from gathering, it's also trying to work out how it would oppose it. I mean, I've been reading the National Planning Policy Framework today. I mean, the wording is pretty opaque on quite a bit of it. And in parts of it, you're not going to know what you're doing until you've gone to appeal or until you've gone in and taken judicial review or taken it through the courts. So it's going to cause a big problem for the next year or two while we actually work out how to make it all work. I mean, and the point of the changes with the grey belt, it's not about bringing in those developed spots, as I said, within the green belt. That's fine. I think we all agree with that, and we've got to use it. It's about the other parts of defending the green belt. And apart from stopping urban sprawl and stopping towns being merged together, a big problem for us locally, where we are at the moment, and we're fighting against it, is the other part of driving people to make sure they develop those developed spots of land within urban areas that haven't been developed. And if you allow, as Maxwell wants, that we just go out to all those nice green spaces where we can just set up shop straight away, start digging, we're not going to make the effort to develop those inner city areas. And can I just make one small extra point there, Patrick, as we go? It's quite unusual. And we should be thinking about it. We've got 11 million garages in this country, and we don't use 60% of them, according to the RAC. So all of that's got trash in it, you know, sofas and all that sort of thing. And we're talking about building small homes. Why aren't we making sure that we prioritise those areas which often are in the urban landscape?
OK, all right. Maxwell, look, I do think that Kevin Hollingray makes a decent point, right, which is that, in theory, yeah, all right, fine, we need a load of homes. Well, we do need a load of homes, not in theory. We do need a load of homes. Fine, OK, cool. But I do wonder if there are question marks over who some of those homes are going to go to. And with respect, you know, you're a young chap. I think there's perhaps a misconception that this is all going to be homes that you know, young people who are already in Britain are going to be able to go and get, and that's going to be accessible for you. Whereas perhaps it might not be, actually. It might be people who are, say, recently arrived in Britain, whether that's legally or illegally in some cases, and people might have a problem with that because in parts of rural England, frankly, that would radically change the area.
I mean, you're totally right, OK? So we've got a serious issue with immigration at the moment, and GBNews doing a really good job of pointing this out. Something we need to be looking out for, by the way, is the Boris wave of immigration that are all about to receive indefinite leave to remain. We're talking almost 4 million people here, by the way, Patrick. This is a ginormous number of people, all of whom are about to be entitled to all sorts of state benefits. Now, some of that may be housing, a lot of it is NHS, a lot of it's education, a lot of it's state benefits, right? But if we come back to the fundamental point here, which is the ability to build in the UK, we can't do it. And a lot of the problems, and Ed's actually right to point this out, about the amount of wasted space, that could be, you know, I would say golf courses, which are ginormous and very wasteful and very bad for the environment, by the way, not used by many people, garages, muses, you name them, because of our planning system, which is nationalised. It was nationalised by Clement Attlee. You cannot convert these into productive areas. So we need to have a really big conversation in this country about, do we want property and development to be done by the free market or by the government?
OK. All right. Look, Chaz, thank you very, very much. It was great to have you both on. There's a point that I think we'll get round to talking about a little bit later on about whether or not there's some link here between the potential selling off of land by farmers as part of the Labour's policy and what this might mean for building on certain areas. But we haven't got time to go into it tonight. That was the Director of Research at the Adam Smith Institute, Maxwell Marlowe, and the Leader of the Climate Party, Ed Gemmell. Thank you very, very much. Well, during Advent, as we count down to Christmas Day, we are hearing from church ministers right across the country. Each day, they'll have a very special message for you to celebrate this Christmas period.
The GBNews Advent Calendar. Day 12.
Hello, my name is Marjorie and I'm a minister in the north of England. Advent is a season of hopeful waiting, anticipation and preparation. I wonder what you are hoping for this Christmas. As we watch the news across our world, it can be hard not to feel hopeless. Who can fix the state of our world today? Hundreds of years beforehand, speaking of the birth of Jesus Christ, the prophet Isaiah said this: "He will swallow up death in victory, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all of their faces." We live this side of history with the incredible reality of the fulfillment of this prophecy in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. If Advent is about looking back with wonder, it is also about looking forward to the return of Jesus Christ. And so we continue to wait. And we are all too aware that this will be the prayer of many people. There is sickness and suffering and sadness, that one day He will wipe every tear from their face. But at this Advent time, we know the end of the story. The message of Jesus Christ is just this, that He is strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow.
Oh, what a lovely message that was. You can see all of our Advent messages by going to gbnews.com/Advent. Merry Christmas, everybody. Coming up, thousands of veterans who were ejected from the military because of their sexual orientation are going to receive up to £70,000 each in compensation to correct these historic wrongs. Well, Les Smith, who's an LGBT veteran, is going to join me to talk about that. Do you think that's the right thing to do? Do you think it's excessive? We'll find out. But next, Conservative MP Joy Morrissey has written to Ed Miliband over these alleged links between a £4 million donation to the Labour Party, £99,000 to himself, and the appointment of a climate envoy. Well, could Ed be in a little bit of trouble here? Stay tuned to find out.
Hi there. The weather is turning increasingly gloomy across the UK with a lot of cloud, some mist, hill fog and drizzle. There will be a few clearer spots over the next 24 hours, mostly central and northern parts of mainland Scotland, but a number of cloud breaks are possible elsewhere, particularly western parts of the country. But otherwise, it's just an extensive sheet of low cloud that will cover the hills and bring misty conditions with, in places, some light rain and drizzle, especially for western Scotland and through some southern and eastern parts of England and Wales. Temperatures then holding up under that blanket of cloud, 5 or 6 Celsius by dawn in many places, although under some clearer spells across parts of Scotland, dipping to -3 to -6 degrees. Frost-free, generally speaking, across southern areas, although a few cloud breaks possible towards the southwest, and where that happens, temperatures will dip to 1 or 2 Celsius. Likewise for Northern Ireland, some brighter spells to begin the day, away from those areas where we're covered by a lot of low cloud, mist, hill fog and drizzle. The clearest spot there for northeast mainland Scotland, but otherwise Scotland certainly cloudier compared with recent mornings, and as a result, the frost more limited, although it is a gloomy start for most, and it doesn't cheer up much into the afternoon. In fact, there's little change. There's still outbreaks of light rain and drizzle through some southern and western parts, and some more persistent rain coming into the northwest of Scotland by the end of the day because of a weather front that will be approaching from the Atlantic. Generally 5 to 7 degrees in the afternoon. That weather front crosses the country on Saturday as a weakening feature, and then we're back to showers coming in from the northwest, interspersed by sunny spells, and it will be a bright day across some eastern parts whilst we keep cloudier skies in the west. And later in the weekend, increasingly wet for Scotland, drier elsewhere, but milder across the board.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is GB News, the People's Channel. Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys tonight. Coming up, thousands of veterans who were rejected from the military because of their sexual orientation are due to receive about 70 grand each. Is that right? Is it wrong? Well, we're going to be talking about that. But first, Conservative MP Joy Morrissey has urged Ed Miliband to refer himself to the independent advisor on ministerial standards over these alleged links between a £4 million donation to the Labour Party, 99,000 quid to himself, and his appointment of a climate envoy. It comes after Ed Miliband faced serious questions over his claim that independent research vindicated his net zero politics. And, well, it turned out, didn't it? Shock horror, that the company that carried out the so-called independent research, the National Energy System Operator, has Ed Miliband listed as one of the only active people of control. He's the only person of active, significant control at that company. Ed Miliband denies having any active involvement in NESO in the strongest possible terms. They say there is operational separation. I want to make that very clear. Today, Tory MP Joy Morrissey wrote a letter posted on X, and that urged Ed Miliband to welcome some scrutiny on these issues. And about 2 months ago, she put these issues to him directly in the House of Commons. We can have a little look, I think.
Congratulate the Secretary of State on his appointment of Rachel Kite for his climate envoy. Did the Secretary of State declare to officials her links with Quadrigen Capital, that they donated $4 million to the Labour Party? Did the Secretary of State declare her links to the Green Initiative Foundation that gave him £99,000? A yes or no answer will suffice.
All the proper processes were followed by the Foreign Office who are in charge of the appointment. Rachel Kite is an esteemed person who is recognised for her leadership, and all they can do is fling around baseless allegations.
I'm very pleased to say Joy is here now with me. Thank you for coming into the studio. So what do you think the issues at play here are, then? What might you've done wrong?
So, I mean, it's just a simple matter of there was a donation of $4 million to the Labour Party by Quadrigen Capital, and then there was a £99,000 donation to Ed Miliband, and all of those donations are involved with the same sort of links to organizations that are linked to his climate envoy. And it's very simple. The ministerial code is very clear. You should declare any conflicts of interest, and you should declare those donations before the appointment happens. All I've asked is a simple yes or no question. Did he declare those donations? And I have had no response. I've just had evasion. And I'm just asking again, yes or no, have you declared? And just answer me yes or no, or you could be a trailblazer and refer yourself. Because, you know, he was always calling for us to resign every 5 seconds and taking the moral high ground. He had his Ed Stone, and now he can take the moral high ground again by referring himself to the advisor on parliamentary standards.
So if he has not declared this properly, what's the consequence for that? What's the problem with that?
So he will be in violation of the ministerial code, and he'll be referred to the Prime Minister. So that will be a question for Keir Starmer to deal with. OK.
Now, in a worst-case scenario situation for Ed, which I'm absolutely certain that he would, if he was here tonight, vehemently deny. We have gone to Ed for comment. I'll read that comment out in a bit. I wouldn't want to be unfair to him. But in this particular situation, it could what? It could look as though there was a company that was donating a huge amount of money to both the Labour Party and himself, and then he appointed a climate envoy into government with links to that company.
Yes, and the ministerial code is very clear that the minister should declare any possible conflicts or perceived conflicts of interest. It is their job to proactively do so. And because Quadrigen Capital fully owns Quadrigen Climate Finance, and it's the same board of directors, and they gave the Labour Party $4 million, and then Quadrigen Climate also is where the climate envoy worked, and then they directly gave money to the Green Finance Institute that gave Ed Miliband $99,000. It's just, just declare those things before you appoint your climate envoy.
And if there is a problem here, that could be that it would then influence government policy. Now, Ed Miliband is perceived by many to be somewhat of a climate radical. In fact, I think he'd admit that himself. He's quite proud of that fact. What kind of stuff do these companies want? What is it that they're after? What kind of stuff are they pushing?
Well, we are required, both in the House of Commons and the Ministerial Code, to declare any possible conflicts of interest so that we don't seem to be unduly influenced by ideological persuasion, by donations or other things. It's just required for all of us, and we have to be proactive in seeing those perceived conflicts of interest. And you could argue very strongly that the money donated and the amount of, and this climate envoy person working for this organization, as well as the private donation to Ed Miliband, is worth declaring prior to her appointment.
Yeah, if indeed it would have any influence on policy. I mean, there was another issue as well with NISO, which we outlined earlier on. And again, I am at pains to stress that Ed Miliband is adamant that there is an operational separation between himself in his role and this particular company. But there are questions over this independent advice that was given. The independent report basically vindicated every single thing that Ed Miliband wanted to do in this radical agenda, whether it was building, all the planning regulation that he would need, the sheer amount of money that would have to be spent on things like carbon capture, on all of this stuff. It very conveniently said that. And then he stood up and he tweeted about it and said, this independent report says it. Do you have questions over how independent that is?
I do, and I have questions in general about Ed sort of sacrificing our energy security on the sort of altar of ideological purity of net zero. I think we have to look very carefully, and I'm still waiting for that extra 300 pounds off my energy bills. I'm waiting. They promised it at the general election. I've not seen it. Maybe you have.
No, it's gone the other way, actually.
And it will go the other way because we're closing down our North Sea oil, which is going to cost 70,000 jobs. It's going to cost more to heat our homes. And we're not getting those 300 pounds off our energy bills. And then he's spending £8 billion on an energy company that is not going to generate a single watt of energy. And he's put in $11 billion for climate, international climate, aid. I'm not really sure what that does.
Well, that was one of the ones that was criticised about concerns that some of that money may go to the Taliban. There's also the entire black hole.
They're very green.
Yeah, they are. They're very green.
Known for their green.
There's the entire black hole, £22 billion, that they keep talking about. And that's now supposedly going to be spent on carbon capture in the northeast by a company that I believe, anyway, is actually based in Norway. So it doesn't seem to be, particularly pro-British business. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just read to you what Ed Miliband said. Again, I want to be fair to Ed Miliband. He's welcome on the show anytime he likes. We've been to him multiple times. Excuse me. So we approached Ed Miliband's parliamentary office for comment on the question of whether he should self-refer himself to the independent advisor in relation to financial donations. Are you ready for this? A Department for Energy Security and Net Zero spokesman got back to us. We were waiting. There's quite big allegations here. Rachel Kite's appointment went through all the standard Cabinet Office processes for direct ministerial appointments. Now, that's the person who's the climate envoy. So they're not answering the questions about...
No, they didn't answer mine either.
No.
And it isn't about her. It's about him declaring those interests. It has nothing to do with her. It's just about him saying that I had these relationships and these donations. And I'm just asking, did he do that? He may well have, but why hasn't he told the public?
OK, interesting stuff. Well, watch this space, because it doesn't seem like you're going to let this one go.
I'm just waiting.
Just waiting. We're just sitting here waiting. Again, I will clarify, National Energy System Operator's website clearly states that NISO is a publicly owned organisation with its own board and independent directors set up to have operational independence from government, the regulator and all industry interests, with the Secretary of State holding the shares and retaining ultimate responsibility. The government ultimately owns NISO, but it has no operational control, maintaining a clear separation between the government's role in setting national policy and their influence as a majority shareholder. Well, Joy, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully I'll see you again in the studio very, very soon. Coming up, as the NHS hires midwives who specialise in, inbreeding, actually, have we been keeping quiet about the issue of inbreeding in order to avoid causing cultural offence? But next, I'm joined by an LGBT veteran who, along with thousands who were ejected from the military because of their sexual orientation, now may be in line for about £70,000 each in compensation to right historic wrongs. So stay tuned for that.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Christmas canapé offers partygoers a small treat that staves off hunger and soaks up the fizz. Founder and host of Crazy Sexy Food, Hannah Harley-Young, joins me now with a toothsome selection. Lovely to see you, Hannah.
You too.
Origin of the word canapé?
Yes, French. Sort of from the, of course, from sort of the 1800s. It means sofa. So it's sort of playing on the analogy of someone sitting or lying on a sofa. It is about the garnish, traditionally sitting on a piece of stale bread or pastry. Obviously, it's evolved over the years. I don't have any stale bread for you, don't worry. But the idea is that it's something sort of garnish, something exciting sitting on a vehicle that you can put in your mouth in 1 or 2 bites.
It's obviously post-war. What is it? Is it 60s or 70s? How long have we been eating these things?
I would say around about then. And I think what's interesting, I mean, I always look towards even the 80s, a little bit sort of later on, where it's, where you sort of have that, sort of the classic vol au vent, which was, you know, a little bit dry, a little bit tasteless. And I think that's why I've brought a real selection for you to show you how far we've come. Another traditional one, obviously, being your pigs in blankets. I'm going to hold off for a second before I choke. Another thing that I have to say about canapés, there are a few little tips that I must give people super quickly. Make sure they're small. 1 or 2 bites. When you're at a party, you're standing, you've got a glass in one hand, then you need to hold it. There. OK, I would have preferred a glass of wine, but, you know, I can't stand these canapés where I have to put the glass down in order to eat the food. I want to do it all at once.
I couldn't agree more. You should never eat more than you can lift.
Exactly.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. So LGBT veterans have said today that they will finally feel like heroes as the government has announced a compensation boost for those affected by the ban on gay people serving in the armed forces. More than 20,000 personnel were jailed, dismissed for their sexuality or outed against their will before the rule was lifted in 2000. The government has announced those affected will receive around £70,000 and can apply to have their rank restored and discharge reason amended. This comes as back in November it was revealed incoming US President Donald Trump is considering medically discharging all transgender people from serving in the military when he takes office in January. For more on this now, let's speak to LGBT veteran Les Smith. Les, thank you very much. Tremendous to have you on the show. So is this justice then? Could you talk to me a little bit about what this really means and why this is really important?
I don't think it's justice. I think it's a little bit bittersweet, in fact. Right. We lost a great deal by being kicked out of the forces. Nobody signed up to be gay. We signed up to serve this country. But this country and its forces turned on us. We've lost an awful lot down the line. And to get a little bit back, yeah, it is great, but it's not all the way there.
I mean, look, I'm not to put too fine a point of it, but I'm kind of the view that I couldn't really care less what your sexual orientation is. If you are willing, if you're willing to shoot a gun and fight and die for Britain, then crack on, really. But so how were people like yourself treated then?
Well, on a regular basis, well, a weekly basis, I was thrown in the cells, questioned, well, interrogated, belittled, questioned. It's awful. Followed around town, followed around camp. Even my closest friends were driven away from me for fear of losing their careers.
So it just seems absolutely mad. I mean, look, I did a segment at the start of this show on Saudi Arabia, right, in the World Cup, and we're talking about their human rights abuses and everything like that. But do you think that this kind of stuff was going on? I mean, what kind of year was this taking place for you?
I joined in 91 till 96.
Gosh.
So it wasn't that long before the ban was lifted.
And what was the... Why were they doing that? What were they worried about?
I really have no idea. It's unbelievable what we went through just for the sake of someone being gay for their sexuality. Nobody was interested in sex and divorces. You were far too busy to even think about it. It's unbelievable what we went through for it.
Indeed. And, OK, so then I
was driven to a point where I lost control over everything. My career was slipping down the drain, and I did the wrong thing, I'll admit it. I turned to drugs to try and cope with everything. I ended up having a breakdown and getting sectioned for it. Therefore, I ended up then getting medically discharged at the end of my career. It impacted the rest of my life for it, because that's on my medical records, it's on my service records. I got married to try and hide, well, not hide, because I didn't even know I was gay at the time. I got married to prove that I wasn't gay. Had 2 children in the process, and the ripples from all this has impacted throughout their lives as well.
Gosh, well, yeah, quite. I mean, it's an astonishing story. A lot of people that were affected by this, yeah, so they were discharged from the armed forces, interrogated, like you've said. I mean, look, I shudder to think, because unfortunately the suicide rate amongst veterans is high enough as it is. Without this kind of stuff, without this kind of stuff going on, but presumably this will have led to people taking their own lives.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot more lives were lost without the inclination of them being gay, without the knowledge of it.
And when it comes to, I suppose, how this made people feel at the time, well, you were prepared to, risk it all to be sent anywhere in the world to fight for this country, fight for, I suppose, fight for our values in a way. Meanwhile, all the while, some of those values that they were trying to force on you were pretty out of order.
I was fighting for the liberal values of this country, and those liberal values were turned against me.
Let's just talk a little bit very quickly about the money side of it here now. So what is it then? You could get about 70 grand in compensation. Is that right?
I'm not actually quite sure, because I've been reading the forms through today and applying. There are caveats within it that say if the ban wasn't solely down to being your sexuality, then they'd still have to consider the reasons for your discharge, and you may not actually get anything. So with me being medically discharged at the end of it, I could still walk away with nothing and have no recompense for what happened.
Well, let's stay in touch, Les, and let's see how you get on, and we can follow this up. But thank you very much for coming on the show this evening, and thank you very much for talking to us here at GB News. It's Les Smith there, who is a veteran, an LGBT veteran, who's been talking about that incident I must say I find absolutely bizarre. But still to come, smuggling gangs have been pranking emergency services into going to incidents which do not exist in order to clear a path to send their boats across. That's a GB News exclusive. But next, well, have we been keeping quiet about the issue of inbreeding in order to avoid causing cultural offence? You will not believe what the woke NHS has been doing now. Stay tuned.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there. The weather is turning increasingly gloomy across the UK with a lot of cloud, some mist, hill fog and drizzle. There will be a few clearer spots over the next 24 hours, mostly central and northern parts of mainland Scotland, but a number of cloud breaks are possible elsewhere, particularly western parts of the country. But otherwise, it's just an extensive sheet of low cloud that will cover the hills and bring misty conditions with, in places, some light rain and drizzle, especially for western Scotland and through some southern and eastern parts of England and Wales. Temperatures then holding up under that blanket of cloud, 5 or 6 Celsius by dawn in many places, although under some clearer spells across parts of Scotland, dipping to -3 to -6 degrees. Frost-free, generally speaking, across southern areas, although a few cloud breaks possible towards the southwest, and where that happens, temperatures will dip to 1 or 2 Celsius. Likewise for Northern Ireland, some brighter spells to begin the day, away from those areas where we're covered by a lot of low cloud, mist, hill fog and drizzle. The clearest spot there for northeast mainland Scotland, but otherwise Scotland certainly cloudier compared with recent mornings, and as a result, the frost more limited, although it is a gloomy start for most, and it doesn't cheer up much into the afternoon. In fact, there's little change. There's still outbreaks of light rain and drizzle through some southern and western parts, and some more persistent rain coming into the northwest of Scotland by the end of the day because of a weather front that will be approaching from the Atlantic. Generally 5 to 7 degrees in the afternoon. That weather front crosses the country on Saturday as a weakening feature, and then we're back to showers coming in from the northwest, interspersed by sunny spells, and it will be a bright day across some eastern parts whilst we keep cloudier skies in the west. And later in the weekend, increasingly wet for Scotland, drier elsewhere, but milder across the board.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Imagine getting a call to tell you that you've won £50,000 in tax-free cash, our biggest cash prize of the year.
Oh my God.
Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10 p.m, or close enough anyway. I'm Patrick Christys. Tonight,
sisters have inherited the same disease as Mohsin. They can neither see nor hear.
the NHS is hiring specialists in inbreeding and trying to claim that cousin marriage is the same as white British women over 34 having babies. It's not, and we have a massive cultural problem here. Also,
the reason the practice is so common is that ordinary people see family intermarriage overall as something that is very positive, something that helps build family bonds and helps put families on a more secure financial foothold.
has the NHS been too afraid of being called racist to highlight the scale of inbreeding in Britain? Also, it's a big GB News exclusive. I reveal the sickening new way that people smugglers are getting illegal migrants across the channel, and...
Badnock says that lunch is for wimps. Well, I tell you what, I think that lunch is pretty cool.
Nigel Farage hits back at Badenoch, saying that lunch is for wimps. On my panel this evening is political consultant Suzanne Evans, we've got political commentator Charlie Downs, and the ex-Labour Party advisor Matthew Larser, and, believe it or not, this is now topping the charts.
It'll be freezing this Christmas while Keir Starmer's warm.
Amazing, it's happened. Get ready, Britain, here we go. The woke NHS wants you to believe that cousin marriage is normal. It's not. Next.
Good evening. At 10 o'clock, your top story. The government will not change the terrorist status of the rebels who toppled the Syrian regime, according to Defence Secretary. Speaking after an emergency Cobra meeting, John Healey said the government is laser-focused on stopping a resurgence of terror groups like ISIS in the Middle East. But now is not the time to consider removing Hayat Tahrir al-Sham from the prescribed terror list.
Conscription is not a matter for now. It doesn't stop us talking to all the parties. And our interest in HDS is that they live up to their promises to protect the rights of all individuals and all groups, to respect international law, and to prevent Syria becoming a base for fresh terrorist threats.
A body has been found in the search for former England rugby player Tom Voice, who went missing 5 days ago. It's feared the 43-year-old was swept away while trying to cross a flooded river on Saturday night during Storm Dara. It's believed Mr Voice had entered the River Anne near Anwick after attempting to cross Aberwick Ford in his car. Northumbria Police's Marine Unit discovered a body earlier today, describing the development as extremely sad. In other news, a man who tried to set fire to a hotel housing asylum seekers has been jailed for 9 years, the joint longest prison sentence in connection with the UK's summer of riots. Levi Fishlock smashed windows and stoked a flaming bin at the Holiday Inn Express in Rotherham during a spate of disorder on the 4th of August. Time magazine has named President-elect Donald Trump as its Person of the Year. It's the second time he's been awarded the title, and in accepting the honour, he said next year will be even bigger.
I think we're going to have a tremendous run. We have to straighten out some problems, some big problems in the world. When we left, we didn't have any of these problems. We didn't have Russia with Ukraine. We didn't have Israel October 7th. We didn't have the Afghanistan disaster. We didn't have inflation. We had no inflation. And we had a very strong economy. And we're going to do that again, but I think we're going to even up it because now we have experience.
Well, shortly after, the president-elect opened trading at the New York Stock Exchange. That went longer for more than I could remember, but your last story for now, comedian Duncan Norvelle has died aged 66. Hailed as one of the last legends of true variety comedy, the entertainer is known for the catchphrase, "Chase me." He died in hospital, surrounded by his loved ones. That's all for now. Let's get you back to Patrick.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The NHS has said the cultural practice of having sex and children with your first cousins is just like white women having babies over the age of 34. Well, no, it's not. is it? The NHS is too afraid of offending a certain culture to speak up about a health epidemic among children based on a barbaric, sickening and outdated practice that has no place in British society. The report states, it is important to mention that just like a cousin marriage is a cultural practice in Asian/British Pakistani heritage, resulting in increasing risk factors for congenital anomalies, so too is choosing to give birth at or after age 34 in white British women/couples. This is largely a result of choosing lifestyles embedded in liberal values, such as preferring jobs, careers, bodily fitness and individualism over giving birth before the age 34. How dare they put having sex with your first cousin, and presumably coming from a very long line of first cousins, on a par with a white British woman in her early 30s delaying motherhood for a year so she can get on in her career? It is a disgusting thing to say. There's no way we'd be sweeping any other health issue like this under the carpet, would we? I mean, you're not even allowed to advertise cheese on the London Underground, for goodness sake, in case someone looks at a block of Wensleydale and can't physically restrain themselves from going into M&S and gorging on it until they give themselves kidney failure. But you can advertise on the NHS for nurses who specialise in inbreeding. Welcome to modern Britain, everybody. The woke, progressive arc of liberal inclusivity and multiculturalism has resulted in incest nurses. Close relative marriage neonatal nurses can earn about 50 grand a year picking up the pieces, so people, predominantly from Pakistani heritage, can continue churning out kids with inbreeding problems and expecting the taxpayer to pay the bill. Now, I can't help but wonder whether if this wasn't such a culturally and racially charged topic, perhaps the problem might have been handled differently. Have we been too afraid of causing offence? Well, the Daily Mail seems to have been. Here's a picture that they used to furnish their article on all of this. It was a picture of a white American inbred family. But that's not who we're really talking about here, is it? No, because according to numerous different reports, around 62% of mothers of Pakistani heritage were married to their first cousin in a study carried out in Bradford 10 years ago. You'll be relieved to know that's now fallen to about 46%. The London Borough of Redbridge found that 1 in 5 child deaths were caused by their parents being related. A report from Birmingham found that 1 in 5 baby deaths were linked to first or second cousin couples. Yes, the Tories should have banned this when they were in power. But Labour are the government now. It's their job. Now, they don't look like they're going to do it. Why not? Ah, yes, well, I suppose they wouldn't want to be culturally insensitive now, would they? Let's get thoughts from my panel this evening. Political consultant Suzanne Evans. We've also got political commentator Charlie Downs, former Labour Party advisor Matthew Larser. I mean, Suzanne, the NHS telling people that cousin marriage and therefore producing offspring in cousin marriages is the same thing as white British women aged 34 having a baby is frankly a disgrace.
OK, well, there's two things here, aren't there? First of all, I don't think it's the NHS's, the NHS shouldn't be defending any practice that leads to birth defects. That's the first thing. But is it a fact? Is it a fact that women over 35 have the same number of birth defects as first cousin marriage? If that's a fact, then that's a fact and that's the way it is. So when I first heard about this bill coming forward to ban first cousin marriages in this country, I thought, yeah, great, absolutely we should. And then I thought about it a bit more and I'm actually not so sure. So I'm open to being persuaded on this one, to be honest. The idea of a ban, I can see where it's coming from, and it is because I think we're talking about one particular culture where it is rife, and I think that's wrong. And absolutely it shouldn't be happening and people should be dissuaded from it. But if we have an all-out ban, that means, for instance, that the whole premise that we're having babies born with defects falls apart, really, because what about first cousins who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s? Are they not allowed to get married when they're not going to be doing any harm to anybody?
I still think that's a bit weird.
I still think it's a bit weird, and I don't think it's right. But I think an all-out ban is probably going a little bit too far.
You could ban them from having kids, at least, I suppose.
Well, I think there are lots of people who shouldn't have children for all sorts of reasons who are allowed to have children, but that's a different matter. But, look at our history. Queen Victoria married her first cousin,
but they stopped
Prince
doing
Albert.
it, Suzanne.
Jerry Lee Lewis more recently, although she was 12, and I really do draw the line at that, absolutely. Right. Albert Einstein married
62% of women in Birmingham in that survey were married to either their Bradford, apologies, were married to either their first or second cousin. I'm trying to know, well, what's your view on this? I mean, the NHS, now hiring nurses that are specialists in inbreeding, to me, seems like a backward step.
Well, I've got to tell you, Patrick, someone very close to me works in the NHS, and she works in a particularly diverse area of the country, and she's quite often dealing with mothers who are in relationships with their cousins, and she's dealing with the children that these couples have, and the rate of birth defects that she tells me about is absolutely shocking. The extra paperwork that it entails, the extra money, the extra time, the extra resources, these are all optional things that have been introduced into Britain as part of government policy, because let's be honest about this, it's not the native British population doing this en masse. It is an immigrant population that is engaging in these practices. And there's something you touched on in your monologue that I think really is crucial here, which is that this conversation about what this NHS trust has said, it actually strikes at the heart of the moral paradigm that we've lived in the West basically since the end of the Second World War, where the idea of judging somebody, the idea of drawing value judgments to say that one way of life is better than another is regarded as evil because it's somehow excuse me, an infringement on that person's freedom or their, ability to express themselves. We're at a point now where we are equating the 34-year-old white women we're having children with cousin marriage, and that just it should indicate the level of insanity that we've reached.
It's not insanity. It's like I was saying, is that a fact or not? I suspect it's probably wrong. It doesn't ring true to me at all, to be honest. But if it's a fact, it's a fact.
No, the facts are, according to this report, was that if you look at the congenital defects amongst people who are in first and second cousin marriages, they are significant, right? There's a significant percentage of it. But when you look at women who are over the age of 34, and my understanding of this report is that they also factored in things such as obesity and smoking and other issues, then you could reach a level of congenital defects that were not massively dissimilar, but certainly not as bad as first or second.
I mean, the fact is, if you want to become a mother, you should be doing everything in your power to make sure your baby is healthy. And I think any woman should think very twice about marrying their first cousin if they're going to have babies. But my point is, I'm just not sure a ban is actually the right way to go here.
But why can we not just condemn this?
Issue, well, I think as the culture issue, I think we could take a different approach. We could say, for instance, if you're a Pakistani citizen living in this country, we will not let your first cousin wife immigrate to join you.
But why do we still labour under this delusion that all cultures are equal? Because all cultures are not equal.
I would never argue.
But that is the place. That's the place that this argument comes from. It's this notion that we have to treat all cultures with equal kind of treatment, which is nonsense.
Rather than cultures.
Behaviour comes from culture.
It's interesting you say that because I get what you're saying. We had Iqbal Mohammed, who was stood up in the House of Commons.
I never thought we'd have Suzanne agreeing with him.
I don't agree with him. Don't just get it wrong.
You're Iqbal Mohammed adjacent on this one.
I've defended Saudi Arabia.
But look, to make it more of a political issue, right? Unequivocally, if the Tories are going to make a big hoo-ha about this now, they should have made a hoo-ha about this.
Absolutely. Many such cases, yeah.
Yeah, fine. Yeah. But they didn't. We are where we are, as they say in middle management. So we are currently now with a Labour government. They are quite quiet on this. Do you think they're quiet on it because they don't want to create a cultural issue for themselves?
So I think that Iqbal Mohammed's speech that we heard there, I'd say that he is a left-wing Gaza independent who beat the Labour candidate. I'd say to all those on the liberal left who were cheering when those Gaza independents were elected, if you're a feminist, I wouldn't be particularly backing sentiments as expressed by Mr Mohammed there. In terms of what the government's going to do, so what's happened has brought this to is that Tory MP brought, I'm not sure if it was a private member's bill or a 10-minute rule bill, but it was a 10-minute rule bill, was it? Yeah. So it can't make it law, basically, they never become law. The government has sort of shied away from backing him and said they're going to bring their own proposals forward. I completely agree that the government should bring forward proposals that include a ban like this. So, I mean, it's in the government's, back on their in tray, and they should make the right decision.
There's a key point here, Charlie, for me, which is that morals. There's nothing morally wrong with a woman choosing to wait for various different career reasons or for whatever reason that may be to have a baby after the age of 34. I would argue there is something significantly morally wrong about having sex with your first cousin.
Well, this is the thing. For a lot of ordinary people, that's the level at which this is going to register. It's just gross, it's just disgusting, and it's immoral and weird, and it's not something we do in this country. Sure, you've made the point that there have been royal families in the past where this kind of thing
people do,
has been engaged.
White, indigenous.
But I think about the fact that we could be having having conversations. It's 2024. This is Britain. We could be having conversations about colonising the stars, and instead we're sitting here talking about whether we're going to allow subcontinental immigrants to have sex with their cousins.
This document from the NHS, which we do think is an historic document, i.e. it's a few years. So it's not. I thought it was older than that. No, absolutely. I mean, it's an absolute outrage because, you know, first of all, it's actually racist because the assumption that only white women wait to 34 to have a baby is news to my friends of different ethnicities who have waited into their 30s, so that everybody who's not white has their baby before 34. No, it is an outrageous document.
And I go back to what I said right at the beginning. The NHS should not be defending this. It absolutely shouldn't be defending it in the way it has.
And it worries me. This is the NHS in Bradford. It's a specific Bradford NHS document doing this. Yeah. We've seen issues in communities across the north of England, like Rotherham, not a million miles away. And so if I was the Secretary of State for Health, I would be calling in the heads of the Bradford NHS.
There are other issues that are wrapped up with this, which is the notion, and this is not all by any means, but the notion of forced marriage in this. And the familial pressure to marry your first cousin.
Now, this for me is a massive issue, and this is my real concern about it, more than the birth defects, if you like. Because any one of us could have a baby with a birth defect and we don't know what causes it or might not be able to prevent it. But this, for me, is the issue. I think the heart of the matter is that first cousin marriages are used as a way to abuse women and force them into marriages. And for that reason, I would be very minded to vote for a ban.
There's also the cost, Charlie, to the NHS for this. Now, OK, yeah, absolutely, anyone can have babies with a variety of different defects, and anyone themselves can develop illnesses, some of which people may say are self-inflicted to smoking or whatever else, where you go, OK, well, the taxpayer has to pick up the tab at the NHS. There is a case, of course, that smokers pay for themselves several times over. However, willfully entering into things like cousin marriage, Charlie, and expecting the NHS to pay for that, I'm sorry, I just don't really think that's OK. I don't think the taxpayer, you know, having to pay, roughly speaking, somewhere in the region of around £50,000 a pop for a nurse that specialises in inbreeding in 2024 in Britain. Why are we paying for that?
Well, that is a great point, and as I've already said, I can tell you from anecdotal evidence in my own life that this is a massive cost to the taxpayer. But even if it wasn't, that wouldn't make it OK. We're so used to speaking in economic terms about all of the problems that we have in our country that we've forgotten that there is a moral element to this, which is, you know, even if it could be shown that this was in some way beneficial to the economy, not that I can imagine how it would be, but even if it could be shown that was the case, that wouldn't make it OK, because we're talking at the level of morality here. And if we can't draw value judgments between different practices, then we're lost.
Yeah, well, it is. Clearly, I think it's an interesting discussion because we're doing it at the top of the 10 o'clock hour. But it has been an even more fascinating discussion than I thought it was going to be. And it just showed the broad church of views that we are perfectly happy to have here every single evening on Patrick Christys Night. So thank you very much. It is time now for our greatest British giveaway this year, and you can win £50,000 in cold, hard, tax-free cash. Here's how you can make that money yours. Coming up, I'll be giving you a first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages. And is lunch for wimps?
Miliband says that lunch is for wimps. Well, I tell you what, I think that lunch is pretty cool.
That's the smallest glass of wine Nigel Farage has ever had. Anyway, I'll be debating that with my panel. But next, smuggling gangs have been pranking emergency services into going to incidents which do not exist in order to clear a path to send the boats. This is a GB News exclusive for you. The details on this are absolutely shocking. I've got former Immigration Minister Kevin Foster on. Stay tuned.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's a time for the vegan community to get together, as well as an opportunity for non-vegans to try going plant-based.
Well, joining us now is from her delicious hummus. We both love hummus. This is a great thing. This is the founder of Chickpea, Hannah McCollum. Hannah, lovely to meet you. And you've brought in some of your beautiful products in front of you here. So can you talk us through some of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a range of chilled hummus, and then latest to the range of a new ambient snack pot, which is a fridgeless hummus that doesn't require refrigeration. But I started Chickpea because of my love for hummus, but also sustainability and reducing food waste and encouraging people to be more plant-based without saying go vegan.
Does normal, say, traditional hummus have anything that's not vegan appropriate in it?
Not really.
No.
I think
it's always chickpeas, olive oil, maybe some other bits.
Yeah, lemon juice, aquafibre or water to help with the consistency, garlic, and rapeseed oil or olive oil.
And there's a bit of a misconception about veganism that I hear a lot, where people say, look, I'm not a vegan, I love my steaks, I'll just get out of there now. But there's a misconception that you don't get the protein, you don't get the fats, and you're kind of just eating processed salads and, fake meat and things. But that's not quite the case, especially with chickpeas, right?
Yeah, I think protein is really important, and actually a lot of people think I need a certain amount of fish every week or meat, but actually a lot of the fish and meat that you're eating are eating higher protein foods, so algae, seaweed, pulses, all these types of plant-based foods. For me, veganism is like you could have a delicious rye seeded bread with just loads of roasted vegetables, seeds, tahini sauce on top.
That sounds
and there's nothing beige in there at all.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back now to a shocking GB News exclusive. Emergency services are being sent on wild goose chases around the coast as people smugglers are diverting them to fake incidents in order to clear a path for the small boats. Yep, that's right. This is the latest ridiculous tactic that people smugglers are using to get people across the channel. So these are urgent distress calls, and they often detail a threat of multiple deaths. So they claim that multiple people have died, and therefore they're met with maximum capacity responses. So recent bad weather conditions is making it more difficult for the boats to cross, but officials expect this new strategy to increase once the weather improves. Now, this is coming from a French prosecution source who's told us that the people smugglers are remaining one step ahead of law enforcement. They're running rings around police and emergency services. They're calling in things like fires and incidents like that the police forces and fire brigade, etc., have to go to. They say loads of people are dead here. This is awful. The emergency services rush to that, clear a path, straight through, go the boat. This, of course, is diverting things away from actual real events as well. I'm joined now by former Immigration Minister Kevin Foster. Kevin, look, thank you very much. I mean, this is just absolutely ludicrous, isn't it, on numerous different levels. They've figured out yet another way to distract the emergency services and get across the channel.
Yeah, it's absolutely sickening. It's another low for
groups and gangs that just show there's no depths they won't sink to. This is literally taking life-saving resources away from potentially real emergencies. Firefighters not attending a real house fire, instead heading off on a wild goose chase. And it's a reminder of the impact for the residents of the part of Calais this whole trade has. It literally brings lawlessness to their towns and their communities. These gangs don't just ship people, they get involved in all sorts of things. And therefore, this sort of type of impact, and of course, it's why we're seeing demands in France as well as on this side of the channel for action to actually finally deal with this problem and actually start cracking down on those who are literally making a lot of money out of not just putting their passengers' lives at risk, but now the whole communities.
It's also presumably wasting some of the resources that we are giving to the French in that area as well, because they're going to be getting these phone calls, they're being told there's some kind of massive fire or there's a big shooting incident or something that they all have to descend onto. That will cost money to go to those things. Then they get there, there's nothing and nobody there. Meanwhile, 10 boats have just set sail across the channel. I mean, what can we actually do about this kind of stuff, really?
Well, you're right to say, Patrick, that there'll be law enforcement resources that we've helped fund on the beaches, which there's always an understandable caveat that if there was a major incident in the area nearby, you couldn't have a French police officer standing on a beach that we'd fund to do small boats. Whilst let's say there's a major crime happening just in front of them, they'd have to deal with it. We always accept that point, which seems to be what's partly being exploited here. What can we do directly? Well, we are talking about France here. We're not talking about Kent. We're not talking about our waters. So fundamentally, this will be for the French authorities to deal with. But what we can do is share intelligence, work with them. I suspect we're already doing some of that, but clearly the Home Office wouldn't talk in public forum about those sorts of assets we may use. But ultimately, this all comes back to a need to look at how we just deal with a business model that these gangs thrive on, which is paying to get into a boat and then ending up staying in the UK, or also not being detained in France and given a choice of either claiming asylum in what is a safe and democratic country. France is not a dictatorship you need to flee from. Or if you don't have a protection need that France needs to meet, then, of course, returning to your own country should be the option pursued.
Well, what is interesting is that another aspect of this GB News exclusive was the French individual that we spoke to there who works in that area, so that they were also getting a lot of emergency calls about violence and casualties within some of these migrant camps, and they didn't turn out to be false. So the implication there is that there is quite a lot of violence and killings actually taking place in those migrant camps. And, unfortunately, you have to wonder whether or not that speaks volumes about some of the people who are coming across the channel on small boats, to be put in hotels just randomly around the country.
Yeah, Patrick, we've always seen quite a high level of violence associated with this trade, both between the gangs and those using boats and between migrants themselves. So this is something that at times can create an almost lawless situation, and that's really where it's out of our jurisdiction. It is in France, but that's why I think it's in everyone's interest, both the UK's and ultimately the residents of Calais and other places that have to put up with this in France, that this trade is dealt with, and that actually many of these people who are effectively economic migrants shopping for a place to claim asylum are given an option of A, claim where you are in the EU, you are in a place you can claim asylum, or B, if you don't need to claim it here, then return home.
I spoke to a couple this time last night, actually, who had a terrifying incident where they were driving back through Calais. They stopped to get petrol and an illegal migrant climbed in their boot. They did their best to try to turf him out, and then this was followed by a group of around 30 or 40 of these people basically attacking them and surrounding the car and threatening to kill them. What was interesting was they were now of the mind that there should be some British presence on the ground in Calais. And I wonder, with stories like this that we've just broken tonight about the French police force and emergency services being so overstretched by fake phone calls being put in, whether they might actually start to welcome some kind of British presence on the beach, or is that a bridge too far for the French, do you think?
I suspect it'll be a bridge too far for the French. I know we have explored, certainly when we were in government, we explored could we put resources onto the beaches, direct support. There are juxtaposed border controls where Border Force, UK forces actually operate in Calais, but those are predominantly not the places where people are encountering illegal migrants. But again, that would be a decision for the French authority. In the same way as, by the way, French police operating in our country. Clearly, we would not just allow France to do that without our consent. So I suspect for Macron it would be too much, but certainly it's in everyone's interest to resolve this, and certainly perhaps a future French government might take a view that UK resources supporting French law enforcement to enforce French law. It's not the role of the British Army or British police to go into France and enforce French law. That would be, I think, a step that would be very difficult for us and for them. But in terms of actually having resource there supporting and helping them to deal with this, but ultimately the core is getting back to, we do need to deal with the business model. And we've seen events in Syria over the last week or two. Will that give an opportunity to start returning people to Syria, which might well help to deal with some of these sorts of issues if we can get returns to those countries where these people have originally come from? Yeah, well, especially if we look, if we've got people celebrating that in the streets, then it would imply to me that maybe they'd be quite happy to go back home. But anyway, thank you very much. That is Kevin Foster, former Immigration Minister, just making the time for us this evening. OK, so coming up, what do you reckon to this? Is lunch for wimps?
Badnock says that lunch is for wimps. Well, I tell you what, I think that lunch is pretty cool.
Also, remarkably, there's a song about Keir Starmer, freezing people this Christmas, and it's #1 in the iTunes charts. It's got to #1. I'll have all of that, and of course, we'll first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages in just a couple of minutes, so don't move.
Hi there. The weather is turning increasingly gloomy across the UK with a lot of cloud, some mist, hill fog and drizzle. There will be a few clearer spots over the next 24 hours, mostly central and northern parts of mainland Scotland, but a number of cloud breaks are possible elsewhere, particularly western parts of the country. But otherwise, it's just an extensive sheet of low cloud that will cover the hills and bring misty conditions with, in places, some light rain and drizzle, especially for western Scotland and through some southern and eastern parts of England and Wales. Temperatures then holding up under that blanket of cloud, 5 or 6 Celsius by dawn in many places, although under some clearer spells across parts of Scotland, dipping to -3 to -6 degrees. Frost-free, generally speaking, across southern areas, although a few cloud breaks possible towards the southwest, and where that happens, temperatures will dip to 1 or 2 Celsius. Likewise for Northern Ireland, some brighter spells to begin the day away from those areas where we're covered by a lot of low cloud, mist, hill fog and drizzle. The clearest spot there for northeast mainland Scotland, but otherwise Scotland certainly cloudier compared with recent mornings, and as a result, the frost more limited. Although it is a gloomy start for most, and it doesn't cheer up much into the afternoon. In fact, there's little change. There's still outbreaks of light rain and drizzle through some southern and western parts, and some more persistent rain coming into the northwest of Scotland by the end of the day because of a weather front that will be approaching from the Atlantic. Generally 5 to 7 degrees in the afternoon. That weather front crosses the country on Saturday as a weakening feature, and then we're back to showers coming in from the northwest, interspersed by sunny spells, and it will be a bright day across some eastern parts whilst we keep cloudier skies in the west. And later in the weekend, increasingly wet for Scotland, drier elsewhere, but milder across the board.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player app. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys tonight. Here are your front pages. So, we start with the Daily Mail. Andrew advisor is banned over fears he's a Chinese spy. This is a businessman who was Prince Andrew's close confidant and was invited to his birthday party, is barred from the UK now on security grounds. Well, we didn't think things could get much worse for Andrew, but it turns out, yes, they can. Well, we're sticking with the royal theme on the front of the Sun. Fantastic story, this. So, Palace Christmas party punch-up. There was a bar brawl, apparently, and police swooped in to arrest a drunk maid. So the detail on this is there was a Christmas party for Buckingham Palace staff, and it spiralled out of control with police called to a nearby bar after glasses were hurled and punches were thrown. I'm going to give you a bit more detail on this shortly, but I'll whiz you through the rest of the front pages. The Times goes, again with that Prince Andrew story, Chinese spy with links to Andrew banned from the UK. So apparently he appointed an alleged Chinese spy as his business advisor and promised him links to the heart of the royal family in a serious breach of national security. Grief. The Daily Telegraph, well, here we go again. Andrew's links to China spy revealed. And what else have we got here? March of wind farms as public opposition is swept aside. Yes, this is Ed Miliband apparently set to overrule residents and just plough ahead with wind farms absolutely everywhere. All right, first things first then. The one on the Sun is the most sensational in a sense, which is, we recently had the GBNews Christmas party and there was none of this. There was none of
Well, I was in bed with this terrible cough, which viewers may have been able to hear, so I missed it. Was there anything from page where
no one arrested any maids. We don't have any maids. And there was no glasses thrown in anger. I don't think. But this is interesting. I mean, it's an absolute shocker of a Christmas party story. I think, to be honest with you, now we're doing this, probably the more serious one, is this Andrew advisor banned over fears that he's a Chinese spy. I mean, I was going to say Andrew can't quite catch a break, but, I mean, this is all his own fault, isn't it?
The company that man keeps, it is really quite extraordinary. Although I suppose in his defence, I might say, I suppose spies by their very nature are undercover and you don't know they're spies. Maybe we've all got friends who are spies. Maybe we don't know, but he really
Maybe
does
one of us is.
Yeah. Oh, steady on, Matthew. Which one?
Yeah.
But yeah, he does keep some funny company.
Well, he's not the worst person who's invited to Buckingham Palace.
No, indeed. I mean, he seems to make a habit of surrounding himself with dodgy intelligence agents, It's very strange.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's slightly, on a sort of more serious note, partly because if I laugh, I start coughing again, what are our security services doing? Do they go light touch on the royals? If you're vetted, politicians are vetted, files are quite rightly kept to make sure that the interference isn't going on. But is that not extended to the royal family? It must do.
Yeah, so the supposed secret agent has been banned from the country on security grounds. This comes after MI5 probed into him. It's according to court documents as well that have been revealed now. He was at one point apparently so close to the prince that he was invited to his 60th birthday party. An advisor to Andrew is said to have told the alleged spy, "You sit at the top of a tree that many, many people would like to be on."
I can't help but wonder with stories like this. It's easy to think that Prince Andrew is just a mug who's just been taken for a fool by all of these various characters that he's surrounded himself with over the years. But actually, is he? Is he an idiot? I'm kind of not prepared to just buy that he's just been.
Oh, well, you think this is so bad that maybe you're starting to look at it and go, is Prince Andrew a bad actor?
Maybe.
Oh, interesting.
I think it's probably being the spare rather than the heir, a kind of syndrome that you want to be friends with everybody and make your way in the world because you're never going to get the top job.
It does tend to send people a bit mad, doesn't it, with Harry and others?
Argument for Republic.
No.
I knew that.
I think I should have
President Blair? I'm sure you'd love it.
Oh, my gosh.
That's always
Love it.
I should probably at this point say that I think now I'm legally obliged to say that Prince Andrew is probably just stupid and not a bad actor.
Yes.
So
all allegations.
Yeah. Right, now, I think we're going to be talking about lunch. Does anybody have lunch today?
Did I have... Oh, yes. No, I don't think I did, actually.
I did actually have a sandwich. I'm not going to lie.
You might wonder why we're talking about this.
Yeah.
Well, Kemi Badenoch has claimed that lunch is for wimps in an interview with The Spectator. The Conservative Party leader also said there was no time for lunch, and she has food brought in so that she can eat it in the workplace. She also declared that sandwiches aren't real food. And she was, I think, joking. But Reform UK leader Nigel Farage used the opportunity to hit back at his political rival.
The leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition, Kemi Badenoch, says that lunch is for wimps. Well, I tell you what, I think that lunch is pretty cool. But on the busy days, I stay in the office and have a sandwich. She even thinks sandwiches are wrong. Now, I leave it up to you, centre-right voters, to decide what kind of leadership you want. Lunch is for wimps or me? Cheers, everybody.
Yeah, what do we make of this this sandwich war?
So I've had a few lunches with Nigel Farage, and he likes his lunch. He likes to do something he calls a proper blank lunch.
PFL.
Yeah, PFL, famous among people that know Farage well. So I think it's a bit of fuss over nothing, really. I mean, honestly, there's so many more serious things you could be talking about, and they're talking about sandwiches. I'm actually quite disappointed that this is the only reason Kemi's made that. Sorry to be serious, it's a funny thing, but it's the only reason Kemi's made the headlines in the last few days. You know, she should be making headlines about the important stuff, not this.
No, it's a worthy point. It is a worthy point because, unfortunately, at the moment, she hasn't necessarily really been able to have a huge amount of impact. There is a case to be said, though, I think, for, if you're one of those people that wants to plough on during the day, Matthew, and not, have lunch at your desk or not at all to get all your work done. I think that's the message she was trying to convey, wasn't it? That she's so hard at work all the time that she doesn't really need a lunch break.
Well, look, I think the classic example is that politicians need to step back and they need to just reflect occasionally. So Nigel Farage finds himself in fantastic company. One of my political heroes, Roy Jenkins, who became president of the European Commission, who was the liberalising Home Secretary in the 60s, of the Permissive Society and all that. Not Nigel's natural bedfellow, but they would totally agree on this. There's a great quote, he says, one can imagine how Jenkins might have irritated his colleagues with his superior air and his ability to get through a lot of work without ever knowingly miss a lunchtime.
Yes.
In his autobiography, he says that he once, only during a sterling crisis, did he have to have a sandwich brought in. Otherwise, he took time and went for lunch every day with a glass of claret. So I think Nigel and Roy take the right approach, and it shows that Kemi hasn't got a hinterland.
How do we feel about drinking at lunch?
Oh, okay.
I know.
I was offered a drink at lunch today, and I said I've got to be on GBNews till 11 at night, and I will be out if I do have one.
Oh, really?
So on a day like this, it's just a bad idea. I think,
Yeah, unfortunately, my views on drinking at lunch have been forced to change in recent years.
That's interesting, actually, Kemi's comments. Very different to Theresa May. Do you remember Theresa May saying everybody should take a lunch break?
One of the most sensible things she ever said, I think. Absolutely, because all the evidence shows that you're more efficient if you do that. If you just, you need to step back and rather than...
I disagree. If I have lunch, I fall asleep.
Yeah.
If I have lunch and alcohol, I'm literally under the table within 5 minutes. I can't cope.
Yeah, I'm always better before lunch.
Yeah, I think...
Which is one of the reasons why
I'm better. Just everybody's body's slightly different, isn't it? But I actually do better in the afternoon. I'm not a morning person.
That's why they say if you're invited to speak at a conference, you never take what they call the graveyard shift, which is the after-lunch shift.
Where everybody's falling asleep.
Everyone's out on their backside, then, aren't they? Right, well, coming up, what has West Streeting done to get into Charlie Downs' bad bugs? Oh, gosh. Good bugs. Sorry. OK, I'll reveal all when I crown tonight's greatest Britain and Union jackass, and I have got a few more front pages springy. And there is a song that appears to have gone to #1 in the iTunes charts, and that is, good news for pensioners, bad news for Keir Starmer, so stay tuned.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
More mouthful of David Walliams now and what he's revealing, what he's talking about. Josh, where do you think this goes? Because there is a lot of speculation about David, who he is, what he is. Where do you think this takes us now?
Oh, I think he's an absolute sweetheart. I mean, it was such a joy to spend as much time with him as I did. And the where it takes us is simply that I think we're growing out of, I suppose, the fairly infantile idea that we might have had about gender and sexuality, especially over the past sort of 5 to 10 to 15 years, where the culture wars have gotten so hot that it's become very, very difficult to talk about any of these issues sensibly without feeling like you're going to get pilloried or attacked from either side. And so Uncomfortable Conversations is a show where we try to have those conversations sort of heedless of treading on eggshells or triggering...
And do you think, Josh, that these conversations will become less uncomfortable when you get people like Williams talking about it and who he is and where he's going, and therefore more acceptable for other people to open up and say, I don't know who I am or what I am, but I know I'm different?
That would be my hope. Look, I'm married to a guy, so I have sort of bona fides on the gay card, and I always felt that it was somewhat of a caricature the way the gay community or lobby, so to speak, insisted on a certain way of talking, a certain way of dressing, a certain way of voting, a certain way of dancing, that you can only be a good gay if you're wearing arseless chaps and straddling a giant inflatable penis while you're going down Oxford Street during Gay Pride. You know, like, I always thought, can't we have a very big tent? And I think what David is doing here is being honest, being upfront, saying it doesn't mean I have to join a team, it doesn't mean I'm any different from the person you knew.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys tonight. Some more front pages for you. We start with the Daily Express. Questions must be answered over awful case. And this is the major fears that murdered Sarah Sharif was likely to be abused were raised throughout her short life. This is the question marks, aren't there, over why nothing was done to prevent that death. The Guardian, some jury trials may be axed in a plan to ease a court's backlog. This is a little bit ridiculous. Again, it's kind of decline, isn't it, really? But a review that was led by a former High Court judge will consider creating intermediate courts where cases could be heard by a judge flanked by magistrates in an attempt to speed up the length of trials. I don't really like the sound of that. I like the idea of, if it was to ever come to it, which hopefully it never does, being tried by a jury of my peers over
Yeah, I
over
agree.
there.
I'm worried about this.
Yeah, it seems like a very dark step.
It does. I think, you know, you have a right to a jury trial for certain cases, and I think that's got to be protected, really. You know, Britain stands or fails on its democracy, on its legal system. If you start to water it down and not give people fair trials and the rights, I think that's a very dangerous step.
I mean, in principle, the jury trial is absolutely vital, but we've got 70,000 case backlog at the moment. People are waiting 5 and 6 years for the case to come to court. The victims, 5 or 6 years to see, see justice be done. So what's being proposed is that some crimes which are slightly above what magistrates can do at the moment, but below what would normally go to a serious Crown Court case, might go to it would be a judge plus magistrates. It wouldn't just be a judge-only trial.
But why is it that whenever we have a question where there is a backlog, because there seems to be backlogs in all areas of public life.
Lockdowns.
Well, that's part of it for sure. But why is the solution always to kill the process, the procedure, which is the most important part of it, arguably?
And if you kill it, it'll never come back.
Yeah.
You mark my words.
It's a very dangerous precedent.
You introduce this, and that'll be it.
It's a slippery slope.
Gone.
Yeah.
Finished.
It's got to be limited, but we can't have 75,000 cases. We can't have people in 5 or 6 years.
But is this the solution?
That's the situation that the Labour Party and the Conservative Party got us into over COVID by shutting down the whole country. We are going to be paying the price for it.
Well, I don't think it's
the wrong decision.
It's not just a COVID
and now
thing.
you can't expect, people to
They have also shut
a lot of
magistrates' courts,
absolutely,
which I think
and some Crown Courts,
and some Crown Courts. No, that was nuts. I mean, that was nuts.
Absolutely. In the early days of austerity, remember the old Cameron years? Here's the Cameron Clegg years. We should remind ourselves. Justice took a huge hit. Lots of courts were closed. The backlog started to go up. COVID then exacerbated it. It's now a massive crisis. People can't wait 5 or 6 years. What's happening in some cases is people are dying before the case comes to court. In terms of some of the victims, so it's been nuts.
But it's the same as letting out the prisoners to make room for other prisoners. It doesn't actually solve the problem. It just creates more problems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or maybe it does solve the problem, but it creates worse problems.
Yeah, no, indeed. Now, I believe that I'm going to be playing you a little bit of a musical interlude here. So Keir Starmer, essentially, might be this year's Christmas #1. But unfortunately for the Prime Minister, it's not for the reasons he'd hoped. Have a listen.
We'll be freezing this Christmas without fuel at home. It'll be freezing this Christmas while Keir Starmer's warm. It'll be cold, so cold, without fuel at home this Christmas.
She told me that she doesn't get out of bed till midday.
OK, so there we go. So that song is called Freezing This Christmas, and it's by Sir Starmer and the Granny Harmers, and it's currently, I'm just double-checking this now, it's currently #1 on the iTunes chart, apparently, and it is beating Mariah Carey. Well, it's beating everyone, isn't it? It's number one. But it's beating Bruno Mars, apparently.
Is it? But it's beating Ed David. Have you heard the Ed David Christmas song?
No, but I'm not
which, to be fair, he's sort of a small part of it, but it's a group of carers, but he's the kind of front person for it, and it's a carers choir. They're aiming for number one for that, but sadly, Labour's beating them.
Also a worthy number one by the sounds of things. But this one, yeah. So there you go. If you do maybe want to support pensioners this Christmas, I know many of you will have donated a heck of a lot of money to the Friends of the Elderly Fund, and thank you very much for that. Maybe you could also stream, just saying, maybe you could also stream this song called Freezing This Christmas by Sir Starmer and the Granny Harmers. It'd be interesting if the BBC had to play that out as Christmas number one.
I was going to say, because in the old days when I was, old and you had to go and actually buy a record from the shop, the BBC had to play the number one.
The number one.
They still have to play it.
I think they still do the chart show,
They would. Well, they played that
but there's an integrated chart. Maybe Spotify doesn't like it.
They played that tripe about sausage rolls that the lad baby kept churning out.
At least it's not Lad Baby.
At least it's not that. Right, now, OK, we have got time just about, I think, for Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. So who's your Greatest Britain, please?
So my Greatest Britain is Tom Bradshaw, who's the president of the National Farmers Union. He broke down before the Environment Secretary this week when he was talking about the heritage and the custodian of the land that farmers have.
We've got a clip, I think.
Very moving.
I think we've got a clip.
This is a lifetime of work. It's the heritage.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a strong start that Suzanne. Thank you. Charlie, who's your Greatest Britain?
Mine is Conservative icon Wes Streeting for opposing assisted dying and calling for a permanent ban on puberty blockers.
OK, yes, no, good. I was worried for a second, because so far tonight you would have gone into bat for essentially Saudi Arabia and Wes Streeting, and I was starting to wonder what happened to you. But yes, all right. Go on, Matthew, who's your Greatest
Britain?
Sorry,
because the microphone's falling off of my passionate. Mine is Defence Secretary John Healey. As we heard from your very moving interview earlier, at last the government's bringing justice to the thousands of brave gay men and women who were serving their country but were thrown out of the armed forces merely because of their sexuality.
All right, OK. Well, we are going to go for Tom Bradshaw today, who is the president of the NFU. Super quick, Union Jackass, please.
So it's Angela Rayner for concreting over the countryside to build enough houses in the next 1.5 years to house immigrants for 2.
Right, good. OK, then, Charlie, go on.
Mine is the Bradford Health Chief, so-called, for comparing screwing your cousin to waiting a little bit longer to have children.
Yeah, I think we might have a winner, but go on.
And mine is tone-deaf, flailing Tory leader Kerry Badenoch for dismissing the great British butty as not real food. But remember, the inventor of our lunchtime staple, the 4th Earl of Sandwich, is turning in his grave. But guess what? Badenoch's forgotten. He was a Tory minister.
Oh, well, there you go. All right, the awkward way, it's got to be the Bradford NHS chief. Staggering, that. But anyway, we have got Josh Howie on headliners this evening. Josh, great stuff. What's on the show?
Well, we have Kerry Marks, we have Aideen McQueen, we have all the front pages, of course, all the news coming straight in, all of tomorrow's newspapers tonight, including the end of procreation, which I'm looking forward to, and Spies, and who is Time Magazine's Person of the Year. It's going to be a great show.
Yeah, fantastic. That was the end of procreation. Let's just all give up. Let's give up. We don't need any more of this.
I already have.
We don't need any more of this. Well, anyway, all right, thank you very much. Make sure that you keep it GB News, keep it headliners. It's always an absolutely cracking show. One more hour to add to your evening. Right, thank you very much, everybody here. It's been a lovely show, a varied show. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone who has been watching and tuning in and listening at home. It does really mean the world to have so many of you out there tuning in and really giving GB News your support, especially through some challenging times. So thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow at 9 p.m.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there. The weather is turning increasingly gloomy across the UK with a lot of cloud, some mist, hill fog and drizzle. There will be a few clearer spots over the next 24 hours, mostly central and northern parts of mainland Scotland, but a number of cloud breaks are possible elsewhere, particularly western parts of the country. But otherwise, it's just an extensive sheet of low cloud that will cover the hills and bring misty conditions with, in places, some light rain and drizzle, especially for western Scotland and through some southern and eastern parts of England and Wales. Temperatures then holding up under that blanket of cloud, 5 or 6 Celsius by dawn in many places, although under some clearer spells across parts of Scotland, dipping to -3 to -6 degrees. frost-free, generally speaking, across southern areas, although a few cloud breaks possible towards the southwest, and where that happens, temperatures will dip to 1 or 2 Celsius. Likewise for Northern Ireland, some brighter spells to begin the day away from those areas where we're covered by a lot of low cloud, mist, hill fog and drizzle. The clearest spot there for northeast mainland Scotland, but otherwise Scotland's certainly cloudier compared with recent mornings, and as a result the frost more limited, although it is a gloomy start for most and it doesn't cheer up much into the afternoon. In fact, there's little change. There's still outbreaks of light rain and drizzle through some southern and western parts, and some more persistent rain coming into the northwest of Scotland by the end of the day because of a weather front that will be approaching from the Atlantic. Generally 5 to 7 degrees in the afternoon. That weather front crosses the country on Saturday as a weakening feature, and then we're back to showers coming in from the northwest, interspersed by sunny spells, and it will be a bright day across some eastern parts whilst we keep cloudier skies in the west. And later in the weekend, increasingly wet for Scotland, drier elsewhere, but milder across the board.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's our festive treat to you. Demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Our next guest has a rather unique career story. She was working at a pub aged 18 and Holly Farmer was spotted by a modelling scout, and it turned out to be her lucky day.
Scott Yoz Clark sent this message to Holly.
Holly, 18, 5'10", she does not belong in a pub. And I absolutely love that, Holly, because it's a bit like Dirty Dancing, where it's like, you can't put baby in the corner. Holly does not belong in a pub. You belong on the catwalk. What was that moment like for you when you were scouted by Yoz?
It was crazy. I have to say I wasn't expecting it, to be honest. Like, I was just on my lunch break. I was working at a pub, so... yeah, I was on my lunch break walking, going to Primark, and...
You're going to Primark?
Got stopped by yours.
How did that interaction go?
Well, first question was, how tall are you? So, 5'10".
Very much that.
Yeah, then he gave me his card and asked, like, explained everything, that he's a model scout, obviously.
Yeah, because generally when I scout, especially when I get close to that person, I tend to look in their eyes, and when you see something there, it's like everything works on the face, and then the eyes gives you a way.
Well, you've spotted a gem in Holly. I mean, you can tell even when you walked in, you are built to be a model.
I did my first fashion week here in London and then went to Paris, and it was really fun.
Wow.
Now it's my full-time job. It's a bit crazy, to be honest, to be able to say that modelling is my full-time job now. Some brands will ask you to be a bit more serious, and then others not
So it depends on the client's request as well. Ellie, give us your best model face. Ready? 3. I wonder if we can come back. 3, 2, 1. Very nice.
High fashion.
Yeah.
But you guys do all, like, contorted moves, don't you?
Yeah.
Like, all this high fashion. Do yours?
I'm just permanently living in model
You actually
model
are,
world.
though. He actually
this
does.
is it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, it's 11 o'clock, which means it's time for tomorrow's newspapers tonight. Join us over the next hour to find out which controversial figure is on the cover of Time magazine. And no, it is not that. How did he get there? Anyway, we are finally going to get digital IDs, and can a sandwich bring down another opposition leader? I'm Josh Howie, and tonight I've got Kerry Marks and Aideen McQueen on my panel to take you through tomorrow's top stories. This is Headliners. But before Friday's news, let's go to tonight's headlines with Will Hollis.
Thank you, Josh. Your top story at 11 o'clock. The government will not change the terrorist status of the rebels who toppled the Syrian regime, according to the Defence Secretary. Speaking after an emergency Cobra meeting, John Healey said the government is laser-focused on stopping a resurgence of terror groups like ISIS in the Middle East. But he says now is not the time to consider removing Hayat Tahrir al-Sham from the prescribed terror list.
Prescription is not.
Sorry, did I forget to put a sting in there or something?
Talking to all the parties, and our interest in HTS is that they live up to their promises to protect the rights of all individuals and all groups, to respect international law, and to prevent Syria becoming a base for fresh terrorist threats.
A body has been found in the search for former England rugby player Tom Voice, who went missing 5 days ago. It's feared the 43-year-old was swept away while trying to cross a flooded river on Saturday night during Storm Dara. It's believed Mr. Voice had entered the River Anne near Anwick after attempting to cross Aberwick Ford in his car. Northumbria Police's Marine Unit discovered a body earlier today, describing the development as extremely sad. In other news, a man who tried to set fire to a hotel housing asylum seekers has been jailed for 9 years. That's the joint longest prison sentence in connection with the UK's summer of riots. Levi Fishlock smashed windows and stoked a flaming bin at the Holiday Inn Express in Rotherham during a spate of disorder on the 4th of August. Here's the Judge Jeremy Richardson KC sentencing. Excuse me, we don't have that for you, but what we can bring you is the news about who the Time magazine Person of the Year is. It's President-elect Donald Trump. It's the second time he's been awarded this title, and accepting the honour, he claims next year will be even bigger.
I think we're going to have a tremendous run. We have to straighten out some problems, some big problems in the world. When we left, we didn't have any of these problems. We didn't have Russia with Ukraine. We didn't have Israel October 7th. We didn't have the Afghanistan disaster. We didn't have inflation. We had no inflation. And we had a very strong economy. And we're going to do that again, but I think we're going to even up it because now we have experience.
And your last story for now, comedian Duncan Norvelle has died, aged 66. Hailed as one of the last legends of true variety comedy, the entertainer known for his catchphrase "Chase Me" died in hospital surrounded by his loved ones. The comedian, who struggled since a stroke in 2012, appeared on GBNews with Lee Anderson last year.
Stroke, it takes away your life completely and the person.
Sorry about that. Those